Welcome back, folks. We have a fantastic episode for you today. If you are in the space of thinking that hormones are important for longevity and health span, and if you're one of the people that believes that, then you are in good company because they are absolutely central to longevity and health span. Today's episode is specifically geared to the ladies, but gentlemen, if there are ladies in your life, they're dealing with hormone issues, so you might learn a few things here as well. My guest is Cynthia Thurlow, and she is nothing short of awesome. So before we jump right in, I, of course, want to thank you for being here. Thank you all for playing a part in helping this show rise to new heights. We're closing in on 4 million downloads, which is super exciting. And that means that we've just been able to reach so many more people thanks to every one of you. So if you're listening to this episode and you're feeling inspired today, please make sure to head over to whatever platform you're listening to us on and leave us a review, because those are the things that help us to rise up the ranks and reach more people. And also make sure to share it with anybody you think would benefit from it as well. You can find me on Instagram at Natalie Nidham, and you can visit my website, natnidham.com. And that's where you will find links to my community, the membership community, and also the newsletter. We have a peptide newsletter as well. All the great stuff. Joining me today is someone I've been wanting to host on this podcast for quite a long time. Her name is Cynthia Thurlow. She's a nurse practitioner, podcast host, and hormone whisperer who's on a mission to help women thrive through perimenopause and beyond. We get into what your doctors probably never told you about hormones, how gut health and autoimmune conditions are sneaky players in the whole midlife game, and why intermittent fasting might need a rebrand. Cynthia calls it digestive rest. And honestly, that just sounds friendlier, don't you think? Also, if you're still doing intense cardio 5 days a week and wondering why you're exhausted, this episode might be your wake-up call to be a little bit kinder and strategic with yourself. This episode is packed full of helpful advice. I cannot wait for you to listen to it. Hey folks, just a quick reminder that all of the information presented in this podcast is for information purposes only. No medical advice, no diagnosing, no treatments suggested here. Before you try anything that you hear about or learn about here, make sure that you check with your medical provider. Welcome to the show, Cynthia Thurlow. It is such a pleasure to have you here today.
So looking forward to this conversation.
Same. It's been a long time coming.
Yes, this darn book manuscript, it has rocked my world this fall for sure.
Well, I love it. And I think we're going to talk about it a little bit, at least. When does it come out?
Early 2026. We're still kind of negotiating. You know, there's a whole methodology to book releases, and especially because this is my second book and I'm a little bit more aware of the things and the factors that impact when to release a book and hitting lists and things like that. And so we're still in the negotiation phase of the official date, but it'll be early 2026.
Okay. Well, suffice to say to the audience that what we're going to talk about today most likely is informed by some of the research that you're doing around the book.
Yes.
So let's talk. I mean, look, when we right before we started recording, we were just talking about how we navigate perimenopause and menopause as women is going to have a lot to do with our longevity, with our health span, with our vitality moving forward. And, weaving this whole, everybody talks about hormones. And of course, hormones are this foundation. But I think almost either equal to or below the hormones, we have the gut microbiome and gut health. And then talking a little bit about just everything that surrounds that. And how is managing these two pieces going to ultimately set us up for success? And even I'm even talking a little bit about hormone replacement, which I interviewed someone, I think it was Annika Becca, who calls it hormone replenishment,
Yes.
which I love that idea,
Yeah.
right? Because you're just kind of bringing something back that you had and maybe talking a little bit about the fear and the misunderstandings that still flow around all of those different concepts. So with that, I'm going to release you to now give us a little bit of information about
So it's interesting as a middle-aged woman myself, even though I trained at arguably one of the top research institutions in the United States, I learned little to nothing about perimenopause and probably even less about menopause. And so it wasn't until I was, watching my patients, my whole background, just to give your listeners some perspective, I was an ER nurse in inner city Baltimore. Then I drifted into cardiology as an NP, did that for 16 years until I left 8 years ago to really devote the rest of my lifetime to women's health and perimenopause and menopausal patients. But when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, I had patients that were complaining of a constellation of symptoms that didn't fall into any buckets of any diagnoses I'd ever heard of, especially women in their 40s that couldn't sleep, were exhausted, they were gaining weight, their hair was falling out, they had no libido. And so when I think about, very respectfully, and I would refer them to GYN, I refer them to endocrinology because that was what you do. Medicine is so siloed. And then going through that myself, understanding that there's such a poor understanding of how to prepare women to navigate the second phase of their lives. And to do so, that's lifestyle mediated because, again, traditional allopathic medicine is great with emergencies and urgencies, but not with the prevention side, really helping women understand what are the things I can do now that are going to set me up for success in my 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond in a way that allows me to live very authentically. And to your point, I think that lifestyle leads before medication, lifestyle leads before hormones. Lifestyle is so important. And, we can unpack the science around sleep. We can unpack the science around nutrition. We can unpack the science around the gut microbiome and meal frequency and intermittent fasting, or as I like to call it, digestive rest now, because that's so much better. That's so much better received.
Word in it.
No, exactly. Well, it's that, and it's like very triggering for some people. The word fast can be profoundly triggering. And so really working on those foundational elements that I kind of alluded to before we even entertain the possibility of introducing hormones, which I am very pro hormone for the right woman at the right time. I think it can make a world of difference. To give you an example, if I'm looking at an intake form for a patient, I can tell immediately if they're on HRT or they're not. Because,
Really?
Oh yeah, more often than not, they have greater sleep issues. They have more sexual health issues, whether it's libido or painful sex. They're more likely to have the vasomotor symptoms, the hot flashes, et cetera. And so when we're kind of looking at the trajectory of a woman's lifetime, what are the things we can do now that can set us up for less symptoms or no symptoms? Because I think perimenopause is this wild ride. And then you get into menopause and things quiet down. If you're doing it in a way that is in alignment with the way that your body needs to be calibrated or needs to be supported.
Well, I think you bring up a really good point, and that is that if women are aware sooner and get tuned in to some of these lifestyle and diet and microbiome, I feel like the more balanced we go into perimenopause, the less of a wild ride it is. There's still going to be, it's still a time of change. It's like puberty.
Yeah.
It's still, the body looking for a new set point, new balance in different areas. And so as things drop and other things become more dominant, and, which creates its own symptoms, you need, this idea in the allopathic world that, oh, it's normal, you'll be fine. Meanwhile, you're looking at this poor person who hasn't had a decent night's sleep and God knows how long, which has trashed their cortisol, which makes the hot flashes even worse. And then they get given an antidepressant and sleeping pills, and and it's this downward spiral, all in the name of, well, hormones are going to give you cancer. It's unfortunate, and it continues to be really surprising to me how prevalent this still is.
Yeah.
And so, and this idea also that even hormonal imbalances, like there are women who live with hormonal imbalance, many, their entire lives. And so all that happens as they move into perimenopause is now they get even more amplified and even crazier. So maybe, you want to talk a little bit, we could talk a little bit about what do these hormonal imbalances look like earlier on. So if we have younger women who are listening to this, they can kind of look out for some of this stuff and think about, actually, you don't have to live with the worst PMS on the planet. You do not have to be incapacitated for a week, a month, and become scary to all the people around you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think I would start the conversation around polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is the number one endocrine disorder that is seen in women. And I think a lot of people are surprised by that. And so that shows up as younger women. And 25% of these women are thin phenotype, which means they are thin. They get missed. I was one of them. I am one of them. So polycystic ovarian syndrome is a constellation of insulin resistance at the basis, inflammation. For a lot of women, it shows up as anovulation, which means they don't have an ovulatory trigger. So they're not ovulating. They can have a reduction in progesterone. So they get these very short luteal phases. So let's back up. In our menstrual cycle, we have the follicular phase when estrogen predominates. Then ideally, midway through our cycle, we ovulate. And then we transition into the luteal phase, which is when progesterone predominates. For a lot of these women that have PCOS, they have very short or very long cycles and they're anovulatory. Ovulation is important for a lot of different things. And so many of these women come to their GYN, their internist, they're like, I'm having irregular cycles. And so in a traditional allopathic model, they put you on oral contraceptives. That fixes that issue. But what we don't properly counsel patients on is that oral contraceptives, although very effective, and I'm the first person to say, women need to have the ability to determine when and if they choose to have children. So oral contraceptives may be something that many women use as a contraceptive device. It may also be used to augment symptoms. And I'll keep putting that in air quotes because it just puts a Band-Aid on all of this. But when I think about a woman with PCOS that is young, gets put on oral contraceptives are not benign. They're synthetic hormones. They disrupt the gut microbiome quite profoundly because they are endocrine disruptors. So that's number one. So we think about PCOS. These may be women that have a lot of extra hair growth. They may have irregular cycles. They may be insulin resistant. So they may deal with weight issues. They may deal with insulin resistance. They may deal with, feeling like, during the course of their menstrual cycle, it's wildly unpredictable. A lot of these women do not per se necessarily have the classic cysts on their ovaries. There are still clinicians out there saying you have to have cysts on your ovaries. No, you don't. PCOS is a diagnosis that is made based on symptomatology labs. They may have very high androgens, so high testosterone, which can drive some of that inappropriate body hair. It may drive acne, which can be incredibly, especially for younger women, can be very polarizing, concerning. So that's PCOS. When I think about other imbalances in younger women, I'm thinking about, it's like anything. It's like a seesaw. Our body is constantly looking to find balance. Yeah. I think a lot of what I also see is estrogen dominance. So you'll see women at the very beginning when they're getting their cycles, they may have 5 or 10 years where their cycles are irregular and they may not have PCOS. They may have very heavy cycles. They may have a lot of dysmenorrhea and may have a lot of painful periods. That can be a byproduct of their body. It's almost like your endocrine system, your hypothalamic pituitary, ovarian axis is coming online. And so it may take a bit of time. Those women could also deal with breast tenderness. They may have heavier menstrual cycles. They may have acne. For a lot of them, they may have a lot of bloating, especially around their menstrual cycles. They may be moody. And one thing I tell women is that when you understand how estrogen shows up and how progesterone shows up, it can explain a lot of the symptoms that you experience, like why the week before your menstrual cycle, when progesterone is starting to fluctuate down, you start having more anxiety, more depression, you start having more issues with insomnia, because one of the things that progesterone does is it upregulates a neurotransmitter called GABA, which is this wonderful calming neurotransmitter. And for a lot of individuals, they just don't know that they don't actually have bad PMS. They just probably need either a little bit more modulation of support for progesterone intrinsically in their body. And I do have younger women who also need a little bit of progesterone support that week preceding their menstrual cycle. It may not just be the perimenopausal, menopausal females that need progesterone. And so helping them understand, obviously there are extremes. There are people that get, weepy and sad and they feel crummy and they want to eat everything because they have these wild food cravings. And then there's a severe form of PMS called PMDD. Yeah. And it can be quite significant to the point where some women are actually suicidal. I mean, they're very, very, it's like the kind of the outlier perspective of premenstrual syndrome. So those seem to be the most common things that I will hear and see. you can be estrogen dominant at any point in your life. You can be estrogen dominant in menopause. And sometimes people are surprised to hear that. So younger women, PCOS, bad PMS, estrogen dominance. I think so much of it is what we're seeing in younger women now is the exposure to endocrine mimicking chemicals, which is pervasive. It can impact our testosterone levels. We know the two reasons why we can see low testosterone beyond genetic SNPs. Number one is insulin resistance. Number two is estrogen mimicking chemicals. And so, yes, you can be a younger woman and still have low testosterone, although you shouldn't, right? You shouldn't have low testosterone. So there's a lot of different things that we have to be considering and thinking about when we are listening to our younger females. And then as we're, kind of navigating the trajectory of 20s, 30s, 40s, it's, I think a lot about insulin resistance. I think about the people that will tell me I ate a meal and then I'm hungry an hour later. They have blood sugar dysregulation. And it's because our narrative for the large part as an allopathic and also integrative trained provider, we used to tell patients, eat to stoke your metabolism. We used to tell patients you need to have snacks and mini meals. So you're going to have your 3 meals a day and you have snacks in between because you got to eat every 2 to 3 hours to stoke your metabolism, keep your blood sugar stable. And, the emphasis on heart healthy grains and the fear around fat and the de-emphasization of protein or even fiber for that matter. And so I think we've really set in motion a metabolic health crisis, not just in women, but also in men. And so that will show up as the insulin resistance, the poor metabolic health, the weight loss resistance, people who are chronically hungry, they've got dysregulation of other hormones like leptin and ghrelin. So they're never satiated. They're never full. They're always hungry. And that hunger can be driven by psychological reasons as well as physiologic reasons. Yeah. And so those are the kind of the bigger things that I'm thinking about when we're thinking about the major hormones. And then seeing quite a bit of autoimmunity in younger women, as well as middle-aged women, things like Hashimoto's thyroiditis. We know women are largely impacted more by autoimmune conditions just by virtue of our gender. The XX chromosomes just make our immune system hyper responsive. It's good when we're pregnant because it ensures that we protect the fetus. It is also good/bad that as we are navigating the trajectory of our lifetime, understanding that if we get an insult, so let's say we appropriately take a round of antibiotics, or we're exposed to a lot of glyphosate, which is an herbicide pesticide that unfortunately here in the United States is used quite a bit. And even if you're eating organic fruits and vegetables, you are probably exposed to it because it gets in the air and then it travels, helping people understand that over time, the small intestinal lining in our digestive system is one cell layer thick. So whether it's the oral contraceptives, it is the antibiotics, it is the herbicides and pesticides, the statistical likelihood that you are going to develop leaky gut at some point in your lifetime is quite high. And then you add in our gender, being women, it just puts us at greater risk. And so what I start to see is this amplification of autoimmune conditions. And those are things like Hashimoto's, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, celiac, et cetera. There used to be, 10 or 15. Now there's over 100. I mean, just goes to show you that as a society, our health issues are kind of getting amplified by the toxicity of the environments that we exist within, and certainly see quite a bit of, sometimes people will call it thyroid pause. So you have adrenal pause, thyroid pause, menopause, andropause. All these things can happen as we're navigating middle age. Just over time, this toxicity that we're exposed to can be quite significant.
I find often the thyroid issues can often happen also during pregnancy.
Yes, it's very common.
And they go undiagnosed, right?
Yes.
So your thyroid takes this massive hit during pregnancy. You get the whole hormone kind of cascade that follows delivery of the baby. You've got all these things going on. Oh, also probably you're sleep deprived and exhausted and your body's healing from this whole process. The thyroid goes down. It often goes unnoticed.
Yes. And it's interesting. If you look at the 3 Ps, Dr. Lisa Mosconi talks about this: puberty, pregnancy, perimenopause, 3 times in a woman's life that she is at greatest risk or vulnerability, not just to autoimmunity, but just these hormonal, I don't want to use the word chaos because it sounds so negative, but this hormonal milieu that makes us much more susceptible as women. Men kind of sail through most of their trajectory over their lifetime. Their hormones.
So cute. They're so simple.
Exactly. It's very straightforward. I have all boys. I have all teenagers. when I look at, the constellation of yes, as they're going through puberty, the testosterone's ramping up, and that shows up and manifests in very unique ways. But, there isn't the moodiness that I know I experienced as a teenager, certainly, growing up around lots of women. And so I think that they're saved from that. But I think it's unique how our gender shows up and is both good and bad, right? It's a good thing that our gender allows us to become pregnant, maintain a pregnancy. It makes us more susceptible to some autoimmune things. And then I feel like things can kind of, quiet down if we are proactively taking care of our health as we're navigating, the second half of our lifetime. 40% of our lifetime is spent in menopause. And just once you start to understand that, it makes a lot of sense why it's, we should have a premenopausal plan. If we're doing the right things as we are heading into our 20s and 30s, lifting weights, eating nutrient dense whole foods, eating 2 to 3 meals a day, depending on how physically active we are, getting good sleep, managing our stress, all of these things, avoiding smoking. Smoking will accelerate ovarian senescence. So senescence is talking about how it's the aging of our cells, but in women, our ovaries drive biological aging.
That concept's coming up a lot.
And so I devote an entire chapter to talking about this in the book because I think it's so important to understand that we as women, ovarian senescence, the biological pacemaker in our bodies are our ovaries. It is fascinating because the influence of our lifestyle impacts those ovaries. But like if you smoke, if you're chronically and habitually stressed, if you're eating an ultra processed diet here in the United States, 70% of us, that is the bulk of our diet is ultra processed foods. Our bodies don't know what to do with it. And we could actually make the argument that a lot of these metabolically unhealthy people are actually starving. They are so nutrient deficient. Yeah. And I think there's this presumption that's made like, oh, if someone's obese or overweight, it is really a byproduct of overfeeding. But I would actually say it's undernourishment of our bodies because your body can't actually utilize the food to fuel your body. It's actually, it's kind of stored as this inflammatory adipose laden tissue. And so ovarian senescence is something that is really interesting. And so I like to educate women on what will accelerate aging in women. And a lot of it is these lifestyle mediated things. Some of it's genetics. Some of us are going to go through menopause earlier than others. Sometimes it's racially mediated. Obviously, I just interviewed a physician yesterday, and she was talking about how certain ethnicities will go into menopause earlier than others. And so it's interesting to me. And these are the things like we should be talking about this to our young women way before, they're 40 so that they can prepare and, perhaps ditch some habits that are not in their best service, including, staying up all night and thinking it's normal to not get any sleep. That's also very, very hard on the aging process as well. Or just even, the eat, 3 meals a day and, snacks in between, the kind of overfeeding syndromes that we're seeing so frequently.
Yeah. I think alcohol is another one. And alcohol is an interesting one because again, in the last year or so, I think we're all witnessing a bit of a societal shift. It's slow, but there's a societal shift where there's an awareness that's growing that alcohol
is a toxin,
is not serving you. Like it doesn't serve you in any way. And the terrible thing is that all the memes you see around motherhood and going through menopause is the woman with
mommy drinking culture.
It's wine time or whatever the case may be. And it's funny, but actually, newsflash, it's so not funny because it is absolutely compromising your body's ability to even begin to manage the nightmare that you might be living in. Like, and it doesn't have to be a nightmare, but if the liver is like so clogged down trying to deal with all the, and like you mentioned, like the endocrine disruptors and the pesticides and the chemicals in frankenfood that doesn't really exist. And now you layer alcohol on there and then you're like excess estrogen or whatever comes along and your hormone's like, dude, I know you, I'm busy.
No, it's interesting to me. I stopped drinking. I was never a big drinker. I was someone that drank 1 or 2 martinis a month. Socially, I love a dirty martini. maybe a glass of wine. As I was navigating perimenopause and menopause, is the only thing that wrecked my sleep. If I had even a glass of wine, and what the research is now showing and is being amplified in the wellness community, I can't tell you how many of my colleagues don't drink either. I mean, I just don't drink. I choose not to because my sleep is that important. It's gotten down to like, my sleep is just too darn important. But if you look at the research, if you are taking hormone replacement therapy and you drink alcohol, it raises your estrogen levels for up to 8 hours. We know that alcohol in and of itself puts you at risk for breast cancer, colorectal cancer, just by drinking alcohol. So it is not benign. It is absolutely not benign. And just like smoking is a toxin, alcohol is toxic for our ovaries. And so I think about, how we have this finite amount of eggs, much unlike men that can produce sperm probably till the day they die. It may not be great sperm, but they can still produce it. We are born with a finite amount of eggs. And so as we get closer and closer to menopause, we have less and less eggs. So the egg quality starts to get diminished. But you add in those toxins, you smoke and drink, and it's not like you do it once a month, you're doing it habitually. The mommy drinking culture is a huge issue. I lived in Washington, D.C. for nearly 20 years. And I remember that there was a mom's group in my neighborhood with a lot of like wonderful, wonderful women, but I could not go to the mom's group meetings during the week. First of all, because I had a serious job. Like I had to be up in the morning and in the hospital and seeing patients, and you can't be hungover doing that. No. You just can't. Or have a headache. It just isn't a good look. But for many of them, that was their stress relief. That was their, they'd get together with 30 other women. They'd have multiple bottles of wine. And I would say all the time, like, it's just like, I'll have my glass of water and I'll go home and go to bed. And no judgment, but I do think we have a mommy drinking culture that has normalized alcohol as a compensatory way of dealing with the stress of motherhood, which is very real. I am not in any way indicating that it's not a real thing, but we need to find better, less maladaptive ways to de-stress and decompress. And so I think that can be, even middle-aged women will do that. Like during the pandemic, we would giggle, we'd walk through the neighborhood and like everyone's recycling bins were overflowing with alcohol because people were so stressed out, they didn't know what to do with themselves. Having said that, I do agree with you. The alcohol is definitely having a moment. I think that it probably scares the hell out of the industry because, I think about Huberman Lab did a fantastic podcast on alcohol like 2 years ago. And I listened to it and I started sharing it. My husband was like, my husband enjoys a cocktail like once or twice a week. And he said, it's going to take the joy out of something that I enjoy. And I said, the point is not to never have another drink. It's to understand that when you do drink, it is a choice. And there's a cost. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's the most important for people. It's not sucking the joy out of it. And it's also breaking that association that in order to have fun, you need to be able to have a drink.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
We need to separate those two things. If you choose to have a drink, you choose to have a drink, but you can have a lot of fun and not drink. Like it's just, or you, the goal should be to reconnect with your ability to have fun without a drink.
Yes. It's funny. On Saturday night, I know we were all in Las Vegas. We went to a show at the Sphere. And so before the show, we went to dinner and the waiter was shocked. None of us drank anything.
I know, they hate it.
No. And I literally thought, I was like, you have this very expensive steak restaurant. You're going to get a good tab. Like, don't worry. We're going to tip you well. We're very good tippers. Yeah. But what I found fascinating was that he must have asked 15 different ways, cocktails, wine, a martini. You must want a martini. And I was like, dude, I'm in the desert. I am so dehydrated. If I were to drink a glass of alcohol, it would just magnify it by 100. But the irony is we went to this show, which I don't know if you're familiar with the Sphere. It's just this incredible.
Yeah, I went last year.
And so it was the Eagles, which everyone's grown up listening to the Eagles music. And I looked at one of my colleagues and I said, oh my God, all the people that are inebriated or smoking things or mushrooms or whatever it is they're doing. I can't imagine how it would, there was just so much, all the visual imagery. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I'm so enjoying this process and the experience really. But if you were drunk or under the influence of something else, it might have been downright terrifying.
Yeah. Well, it's total sensory overload. I think you can't, I saw U2 last Christmas.
Amazing.
It is quite something. And I wonder how much of it is it's almost like when I was practicing as a nutritionist, I talked to my clients about recalibrating their taste buds because we've evolved now with these hyper palatable foods that are they're saltier, they're more sour, they're more sweet, they're more everything, so that when you take a bite out of an apple or whatever the case may be, it tastes bland by comparison.
Yeah.
And yet and this is the work I will often do, like if I'm working with someone who's using GLP-1 agonists, I'm like, this is your opportunity. You no longer have that crazy drive to snack and to eat. Let's think about reacquainting ourselves with the natural taste of natural food, so you can recalibrate those taste buds, so that then when you go back to the Twinkie, you're like, ew. Like it's disgusting, right?
Yeah.
And so the same with the alcohol, it's recalibrating your pleasure center so that you can enjoy things in the fullest without this enhancement.
Well, and so much of those enhancements, whether it's food or an illicit drug or whatever it is that people are doing, it hijacks your brain. It hijacks your brain chemistry. And so when you talk about GLP-1s, and we know we have GLP-1 receptors in the brain, it's helping people understand, like, it just quiets everything. And for a lot of people, they have to get rid of the noise to be able to reconnect with their taste buds, their bodies, et cetera. And so I think that, it's like a dual-edged sword. All these technologies, all these fun things have a dual-edged sword. It's like, the pro is this and the con is here. And so where do we, find the middle ground so that people can get the most out of these different strategies, if you will, different technologies to be able to harness their health?
Yeah. And I think they're tools, right? So, and another tool that I think is really interesting that you talk about quite a lot, is fasting. And like and it's funny, every one of these tools that comes up, super valuable, but you get this big rush to the tool, and the next thing you know, it's the thing.
Yes.
And it gets overused and abused. It freaks people out. It hurts people. It can work really well. Do you want to talk a little bit about fasting for women, particularly going through a time when their bodies are pretty stressed?
Yeah.
So I think that fasting at that point, we need to approach it from a different perspective, to leverage it to help us through this transition without beating down a system that's already struggling to adjust to a million different things.
No, and for you to acknowledge up front that we as women can sometimes be our own worst enemies is huge. So for anyone that's listening, intermittent fasting is eating in a compressed feeding window. For some people, it really is caloric restriction because they've gone from eating 3 meals a day and snacks and mini meals to eating 2 or 3. And so it can be a bit of an adjustment. I think for a lot of individuals, in particular women, they have to take to account where they are in their life journey. If you are still getting a menstrual cycle, you have to take your menstrual cycle into account when you are traversing or navigating a fasting as a lifestyle. And so fasting can be used 1 day a week, 6 days a week, 5 days a week. The one thing about fasting is that it is flexible. And I think that's a very important distinction. If you are a woman that is under the age of 35, your focus should be on, 12 hours of digestive rest. If you are not metabolically healthy, then yes, intermittent fasting may be beneficial. But if you are physically very active, very lean, please do not embrace fasting and do it like it is a religion. I think I see a lot of young women, and I think it's important to acknowledge this, younger women that embrace fasting either to hide an eating disorder.
Yeah.
Or they stop menstruating, they stop getting their menstrual cycle. And I tell women one of our vital signs is our menstrual cycle until we go into menopause. Absolutely critically important. If you are 35 to 50, and yes, ladies, if you are in your late 30s, you may very well be knocking on perimenopause's door. Same thing applies. We're in early perimenopause, in the thick of it, or the latter stages. How are you sleeping? If you are not sleeping through the night, please do not add in more hormetic stress. I know that, Nat, you probably talk a lot about hormesis, hormetic stressors. Intermittent fasting is a form of hormetic stress, just like exercise, just like cold exposure, just like heat exposure. And if you are not sleeping, please, please, please do not add more stress to your body. If you can't manage your stress, like I just lost multiple family members this year, you better believe around the loss of my dad and other family members, I was not doing long fast. I was not doing a lot of fasting at all. I've been very open about that because my body was so stressed dealing with the hospitalization, funerals, burials, all these things. And
I'm
it's
so
okay.
sorry.
Thank
It's
you.
tough.
Thank
Well,
you.
that's a tough year, you know.
Yeah. But the reason why I interject this is life happens. So sometimes things are outside of our control. But when you are navigating that perimenopausal journey, understanding that if you are sleeping through the night and you're managing your stress and you're eating a pretty nutrient dense diet and you're exercising, fasting can be a great way to not only improve metabolic markers, body composition. I would argue that if you fast in an appropriate way, can improve longevity over time, but you fast for your cycle. And that looks like we have our follicular phase, from the day of bleeding up until ovulation. That's follicular phase when estrogen predominates. This is a hormone that allows us to get away with carbohydrate restriction if that's what we do, more intense exercise. We can get away with fasting in that part of our cycle. As we cross over after ovulation into the luteal phase when progesterone predominates, this is usually when you have less energy. You may not sleep as well. This is not the time to do these really extreme fasts, long fasts. You may just do 12 hours of digestive rest, and that's okay. Yeah. And so when I talk about fasting for your cycle, that is why. And then obviously, as we transition into menopause, average age here in the United States is 51. It can be younger for other women, older for some. That is when you can get away with a bit more fasting because there's less hormonal fluctuation day to day, week to week. And I will always say we are not more like men. Sometimes I hear people say we're more like men when we go into menopause. No, we're not. We're still women, but we just don't have as much hormonal fluctuation. So it may get a little bit less complicated. Now, what I see that always concerns me are women that have been conditioned, and certainly my generation was, thinner is better, more cardio. If a little bit of fasting is good, more is better. If a little bit of food restriction is good, more is better. If a little bit of exercise is good, more is better. That is the wrong philosophy to have. I see far too many women that I honestly, when they come into my practice, we're taking them off of fasting. We're telling them to stop doing Orange Theory Fitness 5 days a week. We have them eating more carbohydrates. It's understanding that we are less stress resilient in perimenopause and menopause. It does not mean you are incapable. It does not mean you're doing anything wrong. It is physiologically what is changing in our bodies that requires us to pause. The emphasis on is pause. If you are not taking good care of yourself, it will show up quite significantly in this stage of life. And by show up, you're going to struggle to sleep. You're not going to manage your stress. You're probably going to become weight loss resistant, although that does not have to be your destiny. And so it's helping women understand you have to take care of yourself first. It's almost like when you're on an airplane, they tell you to put your oxygen mask on first before you help your child. Although as mothers, it seems intuitive. You want to do it the opposite, save your kid first. Yeah. But it's helping us understand that fasting is one of many strategies. When used effectively, can be very effective, but it also can be a season and a reason. There can be a period of time in your life where you intermittent fast and then you take a break and maybe you do 12 hours of digestive rest. I am in a season of my life where I'm doing less fasting, more digestive rest, more carbohydrate, not less, more lifting weights, less cardio. And so I think it's important to just say that we don't have to be rigid. We are so rigid as women. We can be so judgy and hard on ourselves. And so when I talk about fasting, I always want to give women the permission to not be rigid and to understand that flexibility is going to be key, not rigidity, because we do such a fantastic job of that. Yeah. Especially with a lot of like visual imagery from social media and filters and all the things that we see that are false and not real.
Yeah, no, I think those are all really good points. And I think what's really what's embedded in what you just said, this not being rigid, is your diet even is going to change. Your dietary needs are going to change through your life. There will be times when you can have more carbs, times when you can have less. When you're pregnant and you're creating a new life, your body's needs are going to go up dramatically. And so often I've spoken to women who are so concerned. I'm like, you got to park that at the door, which doesn't mean you get to dive into a box of donuts. Actually, this is the time, right, to really lean into this concept of nutrient density and, making every bite count. I mean, we want to actually, in a perfect world, we want to do that throughout our lives. And those little ratios are going to alter. And I love the idea of digestive rest that you talk about, which kind of it diffuses this fasting concept. And just for the listeners who may not have picked this up at the beginning of the conversation, this is really this idea that you may stop eating at 7 o'clock at night and you'll have your next meal at 7 o'clock in the morning. And that's all it is. Like it seems like a crazy idea because as a society, we've been so conditioned to eat later or have a bedtime snack or whatever the case may be. But removing ourselves from that, the simple act of that 12-hour interruption of feeding is so powerful for our bodies. And it's so powerful even for encouraging that thing called metabolic flexibility that we're all kind of, in a perfect world, chasing a little bit. And maybe you want to talk about that a little bit, because you mentioned insulin resistance, which is the hallmark of that lack of being able to flip between fuel sources in the human body. And if we can ever get that back, that's where things really start to sing.
Well, it's so interesting to me that I think many people don't understand that our bodies are designed to use different types of fuel, like fuel substrates, whether it's fatty acids, glycogen, ketones. Our bodies are designed to use different types of fuel substrates because, if we think back to 100,000 years ago, we were getting chased by a rabid animal, wanted to be able to flee. Our body needs to be able to tap into glycogen, right, to fuel, speeding away. But what's happened in our modern day lifestyles, in our ultra processed modern day lifestyles, hedonistic, we can get things 24/7, Uber Eats, et cetera, we have unfortunately gotten ourselves to a point where we eat so frequently that our body never has the opportunity to tap into stored fat as a fuel source. I always like to use the example. My father was one of these people that when his car got to a quarter tank, he had to fill it again.
Yep.
Whether it was OCD, whatever it was my dad's peculiarity. And that's kind of what happens to us when we don't allow our bodies to have a period of time between meals, 4 or 5 hours, allowing our bodies to have this period of
emptiness.
Thank you. Physical and emotional emptiness. No, emptiness, so that our body actually gets to a point where, yes, we use some glycogen, stored sugar that is stored in muscles and a little bit in the liver, versus being able to store to get to that stored fat. And we have to go a period of time, we have to go long enough where our body can tap into that stored fat for energy. That's the deeper fat. That is the fat that allows us to be mentally attuned and acute. We think about fasting like, oh, the benefits are changes in body composition. No, it's so much more than that. It's helping people understand that if you fast long enough, you'll tap into that fat source, and it is a sustained source of energy. Whereas glycogen is designed to be quick and fast, that the fatty acids are designed to be a kind of like a big log on a fire. Use that analogy. It's very, as opposed to kindling, which is like the carbohydrate. And so helping people understand you have to fast or not eat long enough. That's why when people start making that transition to eating, 3 meals a day, snacks in between, where they start going to 12 hours, 13 hours, 14 hours, and it's terrifying because sometimes they're hungry, they get jittery, they don't feel good. And it's because their body has become much less efficient. It's like you put the bad gas in the car. And so the car is trying to efficiently, move itself forward, but it's just not efficient yet. So this is where, people like Dave Asprey that we were talking about earlier, Dave Asprey, talking about bulletproof coffee. So people will drink coffee, they'll add fat to it, and it helps them potentiate that period of time in which they're not eating. Now, I'm a fan of helping people kind of navigate this relationship of not eating. So for some people, they can go to 12 hours to 13 hours to 14 hours, 16, they do it effortlessly. Usually the more fat adapted they are, the easier time they have navigating to fasting. If you are not fat adapted, the types of symptoms that you will experience, you will get hangry when you're hungry. You will have issues with weight loss resistance. You will have issues with energy. You may have issues with poor cognition. On the other hand, people that are fat adapted can go longer without eating. Today's a perfect example. I have one of those days where I've not been able to eat a real meal yet. And so I'm like, because I'm so fat adapted, my body and my brain are like fueled on, you fast long enough, you'll actually break down ketones. And one in particular, it diffuses across the blood-brain barrier. It's beta hydroxybutyrate, allows for a lot of mental clarity. So when I'm talking to women about the issues surrounding intermittent fasting, it's helping them understand some of you will have an easier time fasting than others. Some of it's where you are in your menstrual cycle. Sometimes it's the foods you choose to eat in your feeding window that can contribute to challenges. And that's why I'm a fan of a very protein-centric, phytonutrient, fiber dense diet, because those are the things that are going to keep you full and satiated. And then a smattering of the right types of carbohydrates and the right types of fats, and really helping women understand that, those choices that we're making can set us up for success or can contribute. Like, I'll give you an example. All of us were traveling the last couple of days. It's really hard in airports to get a decent meal. And so sometimes I have to create a makeshift meal. But if I have a couple of days where I'm not eating the way I normally do, I'm not eating the way that I normally am, it makes fasting a whole lot harder to do.
It does. So yeah, your blood sugar's all over the place.
Yes, it can definitely be. So just to reaffirm for women that fasting is certainly possible. A lot of it has to do with whether or not your body can effectively tap into different types of fuel to fuel your body. And we want to be flexible. We want to be able to use glycogen when we need it, fatty acids, ketones, all of those. We want to have an array, almost like a platter of fuel options. Mm-hmm. It's when we're stuck in that carbohydrate state of affairs, that's what drives that's why we see so much poor metabolic health. People are just eating too frequently, too often, wrong types of foods. And that in and of itself can set us up for poor metabolic health pretty easily.
Yeah. Which to go back to our first topic, sets us up for more trouble going through perimenopause and menopause.
Absolutely. And I think
those shifts happen regardless, right?
Yeah.
You become a little more insulin resistant. The tendency, I mean, I've lost count, and I'm sure, seeing as you're clinically active, like the number of women who must walk into your practice saying, like, I woke up one morning, I looked down and I don't recognize me anymore. And this just happened. And I'm not doing anything different. Or something you said earlier, I'm eating less, I'm exercising more, and I'm growing more. Like, somebody make it stop. And why the hell did nobody send me a memo?
Yeah. Well, and it's all, we have to fuel our bodies. And ultimately that's what it comes down to. And I think in a lot of different situations, what used to work for us no longer works. That's number one. Number two, it's a different game. You're in the pause years, menopause, perimenopause. You have to change your lifestyle. The women that are doing the best navigating perimenopause and menopause and beyond are the women that prioritize sleep. They are managing their stress. They are lifting weights. They are, eating a nutrient dense diet. They have healthy connections with loved ones. And, I recognize that this is also a time when a lot of women get divorced or they separate from their partners, but having, loving relationships with friends and other family members, even your pets or your kids. I'm laughing because I've got a smattering of doodles walking around, but I think
I can hear them clicking around.
I know. And, the other thing is, I think when I trained, so I finished my nurse practitioner program in the early 2000s at the time of the Women's Health Initiative. And so this was this seminal study that unfortunately really vilified hormones. And we had, I think I read that the prescriptions went down like 90% in the United States. I mean, it's a pretty astronomical figure.
Yeah.
And so my mother's generation was the generation that was impacted, and then subsequent generations. And so there are still people on social media that propagate that hormones cause cancer. And if that were in fact the case, young women would be getting breast cancer. I mean, and that does happen. Yeah. But the point I'm trying to make is that it is not the hormones driving the cancer. And so the pendulum is now swinging, and we're learning so much more about how to age gracefully, how to age in a way where you can still sleep and have, all the fun and do all the activities that you want to be able to do and have a high quality life. And so I think that the pendulum is now swinging. And so we're talking about estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, if appropriate, peptides, if appropriate, GLP-1s, if appropriate, and all the supplements in between that can be very, very helpful navigating this age. And I think that every woman listening has the ability, or should have the ability, to have access to a practitioner that can give them options. And it does not have to be, your destiny that isn't. I can tell you a lot of women are terrified of hormones because they think that they'll gain more weight.
Yeah.
I would actually make the argument that when your hormones are properly balanced and the lifestyle is dialed in, most women start to lose weight. We know women gain more visceral fat in menopause. We start, it's that loss of lean muscle, sarcopenia that starts in 40 and really accelerates. That, along with magnifying insulin resistance for a lot of women, that can be problematic. But I think for a lot of women, it's understanding that hormones should not be feared. You just need to work with a practitioner that is going to listen to, what are the symptoms you're experiencing. And sometimes in early perimenopause, they just need a week of progesterone.
Yeah.
as they navigate, because we know our estrogen levels throughout perimenopause are at the highest of our entire lifetime. It's a wild ride. Testosterone tends to drop off, but not as precipitously as estrogen. So usually I like to optimize progesterone and estrogen first. There's a couple
Yeah.
forms of estrogen, but estradiol is our predominant form our body makes prior to menopause, and then adding in testosterone if appropriate. Not everyone needs replacement, but a lot of women do find it helps with body composition.
Yeah. It helps with the libido too, right?
Yes, along with
It's
estrogen. A lot of people think it's just
all the things.
testosterone. And I
Yeah.
tell people, oftentimes what women need is the estrogen along with testosterone or DHEA to be very beneficial for libido, sex drive, even executive function. So testosterone is always looped into libido. And I tell people that's the get off the couch and get to the gym hormone. That is the executive function hormone. And so a lot of people don't realize that. But can also be very, very helpful.
Well, and it's so important, right? Because this is the age also where many women, from a career perspective, are in a place to really capitalize on all the work they've done, all these in their 20s and their 30s. And here they are in their 40s and they're looking to ascend, as it were. And all of a sudden their brain goes offline and, they break into a sweat and things don't work the way they want. And it's the nootropic effect of these hormones that we need to harness at this very time.
Absolutely.
To kind of facilitate that transition. And I mean, so for women who don't have a family, this is the time where the career really takes off. Some women who have a family, this is also the time. So they need even more of themselves online to kind of manage the transition. So, okay. So fasting, yes, but it depends, right? Different times of life, you're going to lean into it differently. What are your thoughts on all the research and the concepts around eating a protein heavy meal first in the morning? Like for me, again, with women clients, my tendency is to not have them fast 5 days a week. My tendency is to say, you know what, alternate days. You might skip a meal 3 days a week, generally not in a row. And that first meal of the day needs to be protein forward. But even the concept that for women, the ideal fasting window is not to skip that morning meal. It's to have the protein, to kick the day off with protein, and then skip a later meal if you're going to do that. What are your thoughts around that kind of management of the fasting window?
No, I like that, because we know that we are. So if we're looking at our circadian clocks, we know that we are more insulin sensitive earlier in the day and less insulin sensitive at night. And so I will sometimes say to my patients and clients, like eating within like a 2-hour window of when you've woken up. So let's say you wake up at 7, eating your first meal at 9, maybe you eat another meal in the afternoon, and maybe you're eating dinner at 5. I think that is very workable. It also explains if someone's wearing a continuous glucose monitor or looking at glucometers, they're like, holy heck, I just ate dinner at 8 o'clock at night. And why is my blood sugar a hot mess overnight?
Yeah.
It's helping people understand that, when you're looking at this hormonal cascade, melatonin is a very important hormone. Melatonin is not just secreted in the pineal gland. We have circadian clocks in the gut that also secrete melatonin. So guess what happens when you eat a big bolus of food at 8 or 9 o'clock at night? It suppresses melatonin at the expense of facilitating this food bolus, and can wreck your sleep, can absolutely dysregulate your blood sugar, your insulin, dysregulate cortisol, which we all know is so easily dysregulated in middle age anyway, and depending on what you've eaten. So if you sit down and have a big pizza, that's probably not the thing you want to eat right before bed, or a really, really, decadent dessert without having had a meal prior to. That can be problematic, or, not enough protein and you're eating like a lot of carbohydrate, all of which can be detrimental. So I would agree with you that I typically am recommending that people eat earlier in the day and then close their feeding window. If they indeed are in intermittent fasting, kind of look around. If someone is doing, 12 hours of digestive rest, probably not a big deal. Sometimes I'll come home, from my trainer at, 6 o'clock at night, which I don't love working out later in the day. It's just not ideal for my circadian biology, but sometimes it happens. And I might have like a high quality protein shake and a piece of fruit. And, I'll end my day with like 40 grams of protein and I go to bed, not right away, but I'll kind of end my day, but it'll always be very protein centric. And I find that protein is so satiating that if someone is starting their day with protein, they tend to make better choices throughout the day.
Yeah. There's actually studies around that, right?
Yes. And if you sit down and have like pancakes or waffles, you're probably going to have blood sugar dysregulation, a spike in your glucose. You're going to feel hyperphagic. You're going to have a desire to continue eating. You're probably not going to crave the good stuff versus when I was in Las Vegas one morning, I ordered in, I had this huge omelet and I had some fruit with it. And that was good. I was good for like 6 or 7 hours because it was such a big food bolus. Having said that, if I encourage people to do some experimentation,
Yeah.
The more I interview experts like exercise physiologists, especially people like Dr. Stacey Sims, who is, a leading women's health exercise physiologist, very well respected and just absolutely lovely. And she talks about, don't go to the gym fasted at 7 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the morning. Have 20 grams of protein prior. And I told her I didn't fully appreciate this until I started doing some afternoon workouts. And I would have 2 full meals before I went to the gym. How much better I felt after all these years of doing fasted workouts. So 20 grams of protein isn't a lot, but she was showing how you are completely catabolic overnight. So for listeners, catabolic is you're breaking down muscle until you eat. Yeah. So you don't want to be in a catabolic state and going to do an intense workout. And so inviting everyone listening to change things up. We don't want to remain static. We don't want to be rigid. We want to be flexible. We want to lean into what our bodies need, depending on where we are in time and space.
Yeah, which brings us to this whole concept of building muscle. And you've mentioned lifting heavy weights a few times now. This idea of having that bolus of protein before you go to the workout, which is a challenge. I mean, I work out early in the morning, so I'm going to do my essential amino acids before I go into that workout to at least give that stimulus, that give your body something to work with. But this idea of we start to lose muscle pretty early in the game, plus we're women, so we don't build it as efficient. Most of us don't build it as efficiently as our male counterparts in the first place. And this concept that we basically get into a catabolic state where the body makes a very clear decision. If you're not using your muscle,
we're breaking it down.
It's breaking it down because it's metabolically expensive. Your body's all about efficiency, right? It's all about what's the lowest common denominator here. And that's a survival thing. It's not a laziness. It's what allows us to survive. But if we're going to maintain this lifestyle, maintain this vitality well beyond Mother Nature's plan for us, in addition to restoring hormones and as appropriate for you as an individual, this idea of how am I going to build and maintain lean muscle well into my 80s and 90s so that I can be the person that's getting themselves out of the chair and traveling and doing all the things that I want to do that we know is possible. Like there's a few, I'm sure you see them on Instagram, like some of these 80 or 70 there's this one woman, I think she's 70 or she might be 80 years old. And she's doing like toes to bar, no swinging, just strict. And I'm sitting there going, okay, really? Like that's annoying.
No, it's definitely an outlier, but I agree with you that.
But it's because she works for it. She didn't just wake up one morning and do it.
Yeah, no. And I think it's very important. Like number one, my generation of women were mostly on oral contraceptives at a time when we missed peak bone and muscle mass building years. That's number one. Number two, we start losing muscle after the age of 40 if we are not working against it. And it gets harder because I'm as an example, I'm not a mesomorph. I am an ectomorph. So I'm thin and I have to work really, really hard to build and maintain muscle. And it's even more so at this stage of life. I'm always having conversations with my team to say like, do I need to add more testosterone? And my my functional medicine doc is funny. We have a very funny relationship, lovely, funny. I can joke with him and I'll say, do I need more testosterone? He's like, nope, you're exactly where you need to be. But helping people understand like, what are the things that are going to be most impactful? Number one is strength training. You have to, and you can't do the same thing every single day at the same weight for years. Like that's not progressive overload. That's not lifting heavy. If you don't know how to lift, then hire a trainer to show you what to do so you don't hurt yourself. Number two, you've got to eat enough protein. And this is where I find most women, if I were to do like Chronometer is a great app. It's inexpensive. I have no affiliation with them, but that's usually what I'll say to people. Like just track your macros, your macronutrients, protein, fat, and carbs for a week and see where you are. Most women are eating like 40, 50 grams of protein. That is not going to starve off sarcopenia. You need to eat at a minimum 30 grams at each meal to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. Now, I have very athletic, very fit teenagers. They can probably sniff 5 grams, and I'm being facetious, but like their threshold to stimulate muscle protein synthesis is so much lower because they are very lean teenagers and their bodies are massively anabolic, like so easily anabolic.
And they're boys.
And they're boys. It's amazing. It's fascinating. And I won't bore you with the conversation I had with them last night about this, but minimum 30 to 50 grams of protein in a meal. Now, people will listen and go, oh my God, I would be so full. I'm not saying to go from 20 to 50. I'm saying to go from 20 to 25 to 30 minimum. And you will start to make different food choices for that reason. That's the minimum threshold, no less than 100 grams of protein a day, ideally 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight, unless you have some special, unique unicorn adaptation that you're told not to do that. And if you're concerned, talk to your family doctor. So eating enough protein and then getting in lots of brightly pigmented fruits and vegetables, emphasis on vegetables, 3-to-1 ratio, 3 vegetables. And that does not mean a potato or corn or a carrot, 3 vegetables to 1 piece of fruit. That doesn't mean I'm anti-fruit. It just means like, let's be smart. Let's get those vegetables in. And when women tell me I can't tolerate a lot of fiber, I usually say there's probably something going on in the gut microbiome that is driving that.
Yeah.
I always use myself as an example. 5 years ago, I spent 13 days in the hospital, the ruptured appendix and a slew of complications, 6 weeks of antibiotics, 6 weeks of antifungals. I was full carnivore for 9 months. It took me a long time to be able to eat vegetables. I miss them a lot. And so why did it take me so long? It's because the terrain of my gut microbiome had been so obliterated. It took time to be able to integrate fiber back into the diet. I find a lot of people, when they say they don't tolerate fiber, they're eating too much. I'm not talking about Metamucil. I'm talking about actual fruits and vegetables. And, really thinking you want more veggies than fruit. And if you're eating the fruit and you're not metabolically healthy, maybe no fruit, just eat the veggies. And then thinking about fats thoughtfully. Some of us do better with plant-based fats. You'll never hear me say plant-based anything, but plant-based fats like olives, avocado, as opposed to lard, tallow, etc. I think most people know where they fall on that spectrum. I do better with leaner proteins, leaner meats, plant-based fats. Others do really well with like a big fat ribeye and like lard and bacon grease and tallow. They do really well with those things.
I envy those people.
I'm not one of them. I'm
not either.
No, it's not pleasant. So I figured out from it. Duck fat, delicious. Give me duck fat fries. I will suffer for a day. Having said that, it's like helping women understand like protein, add in some veggies, maybe some fruit, right types of fats. That's really, the emphasis and the focus. And then variety. Like I would say that we ideally want 30 plant varieties over the course of a week. That makes everyone freak out when they hear me say that. I'm like, eat a couple salads and put different things in your salad and make it easy. Like you could put 10 different things, fruits, nuts, seeds, vegetables, greens.
Sprouts. You could put sprouts are fantastic.
They all count. So, sulforaphane if you have broccoli sprouts. And so I think that we need to make it less complicated to make it accessible.
Yeah. I think that what you described as a diet just now is probably the only description of a global diet. And then people can kind of move between things within that framework, depending on their activity levels. For some people, you can even incorporate some legumes because you're going to get different types of starch and fiber from there. But it is a process. And what you just said, rebuilding that microbiome diversity. And if you've gone through something, if your microbiome's gone through something as horrific as a 6-week antibiotic run, it's going to take some time and some work to rebuild it. But that is fundamentally the foundation of that health and vitality that we're looking for. It's starting from ground zero. Okay, last topic, and then I'm going to let you go because we've been going for a little while. I just wanted to touch on this one compound or supplement, if you want to call it that has really bubbled to the surface. I did a solo episode on it earlier this year, and I myself was like, whoa, I can't believe and it's creatine. And so creatine is the new darling, and people think of creatine. Typically they think of it for bodybuilders and they're that swole look and you're going to hold water, but you're going to look great. But I think what people very much underestimate is the full spectrum of what creatine brings to the table. So maybe very quickly, and I know that you're launching your own creatine supplement, probably kind of going, okay, enough with the junk. We need to bring the good stuff.
Yes.
I need to give, if I'm going to tell people what's wrong with creatine, I need to give them what's right. So maybe just really quick kind of little overview on the good, the bad, and the ugly, and the awesomeness of creatine.
Yeah, creatine monohydrate is one of these supplements that I always thought of as like the bro science guys. Like, this is something that bodybuilders take. Why in the world would I ever want to take it? The irony is I am a fan of simplicity. I like things that have multiple uses. And so for me, I think it's a very noisy space with supplements. Like, people have supplement fatigue, they have supplement confusion. And so what I like about creatine monohydrate, number one, is that it's helpful for us, obviously, muscle strength. Number two, it is also beneficial for sleep architecture. We know it can be helpful for bone health. I mean, I actually have had Dr. Darren Kanda on the podcast several times, and there's like emerging research on bone health. So anything that's going to cross the blood-brain barrier, we need a higher dose. So if you're taking it for cognition benefits, sleep benefits, you actually need a higher dose because the blood-brain barrier is designed to protect us. Although what I find is most women have leaky gut. So they also have leaky brain. It's because they have the bidirectional relationship. And the thing that's interesting about creatine is that it tends to be inexpensive. It's largely inexpensive because most of it is produced in China. What I like is Creapure, which is the purest unadulterated form that is patented, and I believe it's Austrians that actually hold the patent. And that's the type that tends to be better tolerated, tends to be less bloating, less issues related to water retention, weight gain, which, I mean, no woman in middle age wants to deal with that. It's like, thank you, no thank you. But what I find really interesting is because it's so multifaceted, because so many of my patients are struggling with sleep issues, they're struggling with body composition issues. So many of them are already osteopenic. And so many of us are worried. We want to prevent osteoporosis ever developing. And let me just back up and say women in middle age are at greater risk because the bone breakdown accelerates as opposed to bone formation. And that's a function of the loss of estrogen predominantly. So if you're taking estrogen replacement, that should help. All right, getting back to creatine. When the bro science guys were doing it 20 plus years ago, they were taking like 20, 30, 40 grams. It is one of the most studied, well-researched supplements, ergogenic aids on the market. It has a high safety and efficacy profile if you're purchasing good quality creatine, obviously. But what's interesting to me is that when we started to create this new product, we were like, what can we add to it? Again, because I like multifunctional products, we added a nootropic agent. We added alpha GPC, which I love. We added a bit of choline, which helps with absorption. We added some taurine, which is an amino acid. Then we added some B vitamins because everyone needs those high quality B vitamins.
Of course.
And so, to me, it's just a multifaceted supplement. It's one of those foundational supplements. Like when I'm talking to women, I say that nearly everyone benefits from creatine. I have my teenagers on it with the support of their pediatrician. I have my husband on it. My mom's on it. My mom's 78 years old. She and my stepfather take it. They feel like it's given them some more. They tell me it feels like it gives them more energy. And I'm like, that's great. Because we know that creatine helps with ATP production. So, you start to think about like, there's probably more to come in terms of research of creatine, but it is definitely having a moment. And whether you purchase my product or someone else's, look for Creapure. It's usually on the side. And if it doesn't say Creapure, then you're getting probably the cheap stuff. And that's usually the stuff that causes the side effects.
Yeah, no, I said yes. I did. We did in my membership community. We did a brain reset with a physician researcher, Dr. Dan Goodenow. I don't know if you know him from Projo. I should introduce you to him. Really interesting guy. And he does very in-depth, very complex blood test when he starts. And he went through everybody's tests before and after, and every single person was, and you need creatine. Oh, and you need creatine. It was the one thing. Like some people needed this, some people needed that, everybody needed creatine. But so last thing, so you mentioned like in the bodybuilding community, 20 to 30 grams a day. I tend to take 5. What do you think is for most people going to kind of get them to where they need to be?
Yeah. So it's interesting. If you look at the research, depending on where a woman is in her cycle, there may be times in a cycle where she needs more. We know that women make 70% less than men. So women in and of ourselves, we genuinely need creatine. If you're vegan or vegetarian, you probably need more.
Yeah.
5 grams is usually what we're looking at. If you want enough to cross the blood-brain barrier, you're probably looking at 10 to 15. I know that I have found personally that if I take creatine when I travel, it reduces jet lag, which is interesting. I don't necessarily understand the mechanism of action of that yet fully, but I will take more. I will sometimes take 10 or 15 grams to help. And I'll start it before I leave, while I'm away. And then when I come home, and my family, they're always disgusted because I'm the person that flies somewhere overseas and I fall asleep easily, stay asleep, wake up refreshed, and everyone else is struggling. And I'm like, I am awesome. And it's all related
also,
to,
I have creatine.
Yes, exactly. And I travel with it. So I think for a lot of individuals, especially people that do quite a bit of travel, that can be a huge improvement. But usually 5 milligrams minimum, 10 milligrams if you're looking across the blood-brain barrier, if you're looking for sleep support.
Grams though, right?
Correct.
Not milligrams.
Yeah. Sorry. Did I say milligrams?
You said milligrams.
Yeah. Sorry,
and I've done that myself.
Yeah.
I've done that myself because we're so used to milligrams with everything that it kind of seems weird. So when you're going into the 10 or the 15 grams, are you taking it in like 5 grams 3 times a day? Or are you able to just take the 10
I usually
or the 15 all at once?
I usually encourage people to experiment. Some people are concerned that they might get bloated, so they'll take 5 and 5. I've had some women who feel like even 5 grams bloats them. So I'm like, divide the dose. I think that's completely fine. For me personally, I take it all at once because I don't know. I'm one of those people that I'm like, just get it over with.
Because you can.
Yes.
Because you can.
Yes.
All right. Well, Cynthia, I think I know I could keep talking to you for a long time. You presumably have other things to do today. This has been so well worth the wait. I'm so happy to have finally had this conversation with you. So thank you so much. Do you want to maybe let people know where they can find you and where they can find your creatine? Absolutely. And I know you've got a bunch of other fabulously, alchemized supplements out there. So maybe let's just let people know where to find you. Yeah. And also if they want to connect with you clinically, it sounds like you work with patients.
Yeah. So probably easiest to start with my website, www.cynthiathurlow.com. You can get access to everyday wellness within my podcast. You can bounce over to my supplement website. You can look and see how we work with patients. I have a team that works with me. I tend to spend the most time on Instagram, but I'm also on YouTube. I'm on Twitter. Be forewarned, I can be a little snarky, although lately not as much snark because I haven't had the time to really invest on Twitter. And I also have a free Facebook group called the Midlife Pause / my name. There are actually men and women in there. It's a very drama-free zone, nice. But you are more than welcome to join that group. You get a sense of me and my team. We answer questions a few days a week. I personally answer questions on Mondays. So I go through and pick out a couple questions and answer them. And that's probably where you can probably get the most interaction with us other than on the website and social media channels. Thank you for having me.
Amazing. Oh, it's been a pleasure. And so the creatine will be out by the time this podcast is out. Yep. So you'll be able to head on over to Cynthia's website and get your stash. Awesome. So thank you so much for your time and for being here. And I look forward to many more conversations in the future.
Sounds great.
Thank you.